Welcome to AS London Wellness Academy. Today's video lecture is on the muscular system. Now, muscle tissue is characterised by its ability to contract. There are over 600 muscles in the body, accounting for nearly half of your body's actual weight. The muscles' function is to enable movement, provide a supportive coverage for the skeleton, give the body its shape and contour, provide strength, and help to maintain your body temperature. Now, 70% of the body's energy generated by muscles is used for heat. Now, your muscles tend to be narrower at each end than in the middle or the belly of the muscle. They are made up of individual muscle cells called fibres. Now, fibres are roughly cylindrical and vary in different lengths. A number of fibres are bound together in bundles. A collection of bundles is then bound together in a sheath. Now, nerve impulses generated in the brain or spinal column stimulate that contraction. The muscles have a rich blood supply to bring the necessary organ and nutrients. The venous return drains blood away from the muscles, removing the carbon dioxide, toxin, and any waste. Now, there are three types of muscle tissue. We have smooth muscle tissue. This is found in the walls of the hollow structures such as your blood vessels, the stomach, and internal organs. Now, your smooth muscle tissue is also responsible for the ability of the hair to stand up. As the name suggests, the muscle type is smooth and it doesn't have the bands found in straighted skeletal muscle tissue. There is no conscious voluntary control over smooth muscles, so their movement is voluntary. Now, your skeletal, this type is mainly attached to bones. It's often used with tendons, and your skeletal muscles can voluntarily be made to contract and relax. As the muscle tissue contracts, the muscle shortens. This creates the pull on the bones and causes your actual movement. As the muscle tissue relaxes, the muscle returns to its correct size and then pulls on the bone and it's reduced. Skeletal muscle contains light and dark bands and is referred to straighted. Now, your cardiac muscle tissue, this type of muscle tissue forms most of the heart. It's straighted and its movement is voluntary. We have said that most of the voluntary straighted skeletal muscles are attached to the skeleton. The skeletal attachment to a bone that remains unmoved or fixed during its contraction, and this is called its origin. The other end is attached to the bone that the muscle is intended to move, and now this is called the insertion. For an example, biceps are the muscles that flex the arm. Now, the biceps are attached by tendons to the scapula and the radius. During the contraction of the biceps, the scapula remains unmoved. So the scapula is the origin and the radius is the bone that is moved by the biceps. So the radius is therefore the insertion. Now, muscles are often characterised by the type of movements that they actually produce. Now, most muscular actions can be remembered in pairs because one action is the opposite to the other. Now, let me give you some examples. So your flexors make a limb bend, decreasing the angle at a joint. Extensors have the opposite effect. Extensors cause extension, which increases the angle of the joint. Abductors move a bone away from the midline. Adductors draw a bone closer to the midline. Now, your levators produce an upwards movement. Depressors produce a downwards movement. More specifically, the supinator moves the palm face upwards and the pronator turns the palm downwards. Muscular actions that do not have an opposite action include your rotators and your sphincters. Obviously, rotators allow the bone to rotate and sphincters control the size of an opening. The muscular structure of the body is very complicated. Muscles are often located on top of one another in layers or overlap at some point, and their origin and insertion points are usually hidden. Therefore, short of stripping them out one by one, whole muscles are rarely visible in any diagram. The muscles of the face are what create the individual characteristics of people's faces. Now, the muscles vary in its strength and the shape, and they may be solid muscle plates in some and fewer muscle plates and bands in others. So this gives everybody their individual facial contour. Now, muscles are the body's movers and shakers. By contracting and relaxing, they enable movement. Muscle tissue is the group of specialised elastic tissue. Now, more of the body is muscle tissue than any other type of tissue found. The structure is that it's bound together in bundles and contained in a sheath called fascia. The ends extend to form the tendons and attach to the body muscle, which is 75% water, 20% protein, and 5% fats, minerals, and glycogen. The function of a muscle is to contract to start the movement in the surrounding structure by the nerve stimulus, and the muscle will then shorten and fatten. There's 3 types of muscular tissue. Your voluntary striated, these are the ones we control. Our arms, legs, if we want to walk, we do so. The structure is that cylindrical cells make up the fibres, each with a separate nuclei surrounded by each sheath. They all run in the same direction, so this gives them a stripy appearance. The striations are made up of proteins, and in contraction, the actin filaments slide along the myosin fibres. Now, your involuntary or smooth muscles, we do not consciously control them, so they'll be found in the walls of the blood and lymph vessels, respiratory system and the digestive system. They are spindle-shaped cells with no distinct membrane and only contain one nucleus. They have no stripes, which is why they're called smooth. Now, your cardiac muscle, their function is to pump the action of the heart. It only exists in the heart, and it's an involuntary muscle tissue that fibres striated, and each cell has a nucleus. So a muscle works by contraction fibres becoming shorter and thicker, and the parts attached are pulled by the contraction and movement. Your type of contraction is your isometric with no movement and your isotonic with movement. So your movement is when your muscles pass over a joint and the muscles work in pairs and both pull in opposite directions. They contract because of a stimulus from the nerve through your motor nerves into many different nerve endings. Now, your muscles need energy, so your blood supply through the arterial capillaries provide oxygen and nutrients. These are used, and waste products are known as lactic acid is excreted into the blood supply. The muscle's ability to contract is affected by the energy that's available, the strength of the stimulus, the time the muscle's been contracting, adequate blood supply, the strength of the nerve supply, the temperature of the muscle, and the presence of waste products, such as lactic acid. Now, the different stages of contraction and tone. So, for example, the tone, the slight degree of contraction giving posture to the body, and the relaxation is the lessening of tension in a number of fibres. Overcontraction of the muscle tension is caused by an overstimulus of the muscle fibres. Muscle fatigue occurs when stimulated muscles need oxygen and fuel, such as your glucose. Fuel is stored in the muscles as glycogen and fat, and it's transported by the blood. Now, the muscle will burn the food, and the more that we do, the more blood is required, which is why we breathe heavier when we exercise. If a muscle continues without rest, it will run out of oxygen and keep producing a lot of lactic acid, and a build-up of lactic acid causes a burning sensation, and the muscle will stop contracting and become stiff, and this causes a pain and causes your cramp. Now, the attachment is your muscles are attached by muscle fibres, tendons or fibrous bands. The belly is the thickest part of the main body of the muscle, usually midway between the insertion and the attachment point. The insertion is the moving end of the muscle. The origin is the fixed end of the muscle, so it's the muscle always works from its insertion to its origin. Now, the muscle attached by a tendon, which is your white fibrous cords with few, if any, kind of blood vessel or nerve contracting muscles to the bones. Your fascia is your white fibrous connective tissue. Your superficial fascia is found beneath the skin, and it gives movement, passageway for your nerves and blood vessels, and it retains your body's warmth and temperature. Your deep fascia is inelastic covering muscle, and it has broad surface. So let's go over some terminology. Flexion is bending or folding, flexing a limb inwards. Extension is bending or extending a limb outwards. Abduction, move a limb away from the midline. Adduction is moving a limb towards the midline. Inversion is turning towards the centre. Eversion is turning outwards from the centre. Supination turns a limb to face upwards. Pronation is to turn a limb to face downwards. Dorsiflexion is bending the foot up, and plantarflexion is bending the foot towards the ground. Rotation is a movement around the axis of a bone.